The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, dedicated to the working men of America. Chapter 1. It was 4 o'clock when the ceremony was over and the carriages began to arrive. There had been a crowd following all the way, owing to the exuberance of Maria Barzinskas. The occasion rested heavily upon Maria's broad shoulders. It was her task to see that all things went in due form, and after the best home traditions. And, flying wildly hither and thither, bowling everyone out of the way, and scolding and exhorting all day with her tremendous voice, Maria was too eager to see that others conformed to the proprieties to consider them herself. She had left the church last of all, and, desiring to arrive first at the hall, had issued orders to the coachman to drive faster. When that personage had developed a will of his own in the matter, Maria had flung up the window of the carriage and, leaning out, proceeded to tell him her opinion of him, first in Lithuanian, which he did not understand, and then in Polish, which he did. Having the advantage of her in altitude, the driver had stood his ground, and even ventured to attempt to speak, and the result had been a furious altercation, which, continuing all the way down Ashland Avenue, had added a new swarm of urchins to the cortege at each side street for half a mile. This was unfortunate, for already there was a throng before the door. The music had started up, and half a block away you could hear the dull broom, broom of a cello, with the squeaking of 2 fiddles which vied with each other in intricate and altitudinous gymnastics. Seeing the throng, Maria abandoned precipitately the debate concerning the ancestors of her coachman, and, springing from the moving carriage, plunged in and proceeded to clear a way to the hall. Once within, she turned and began to push the other way, roaring meantime, "Ike, Ike, uzark darek duris," which translates to, "Go, go, close the door." Once within, she turned and began to push the other way, roaring meantime in Polish, "Go, go, close the door," in tones which made the orchestral uproar sound like fairy music. Z. Grysunas, Entertainment Garden, Wine and Schnapps, written in Polish. Wines and Liquors, Union Headquarters. That was the way the signs ran. The reader, who perhaps had never held much converse in the language of far-off Lithuania, will be glad of the explanation that the place was the rear room of a saloon in that part of Chicago known as back of the yards. This information is definite and suited to the matter of fact, but how pitifully inadequate it would have seemed to one who understood that it was also the supreme hour of ecstasy in the life of one of God's gentlest creatures, the scene of the wedding feast in the joy transfiguration of little Ona Lukaszite. She stood in the doorway, shepherded by Cousin Maria, breathless from pushing through the crowd, and in her happiness painful to look upon. There was a light of wonder in her eyes, and her lids trembled, and her otherwise wan little face was flushed. She wore a muslin dress, conspicuously white, and a stiff little veil coming to her shoulders. There were 5 pink paper roses twisted in the veil, and 11 bright green rose leaves. There were new white cotton gloves upon her hands, and as she stood staring about her, she twisted them together feverishly. It was almost too much for her. You could see the pain of too great emotion in her face, in all the tremor of her form. She was so young, not quite 16, and small for her age, a mere child. And she had just been married, and married to Georgis of all men, to Georgis Rudkus, he with the white flower in the buttonhole of his new black suit, he with the mighty shoulders and the giant hands. Ona was blue-eyed and fair, while Georgis had great black eyes with beetling brows, and thick black hair that curled in waves about his ears. In short, they were one of those incongruous and impossible married couples with which Mother Nature so often wills to confound all prophets, before and after. Georgis could take up a 250-pound quarter of beef and carry it into a car without a stagger or even a thought, and now he stood in a far corner, frightened as a hunted animal, and obliged to moisten his lips with his tongue each time before he could answer the congratulations of his friends. Gradually there was effected a separation between the spectators and the guests, a separation at least sufficiently complete for working purposes. There was no time during the festivities which ensued when there were not groups of onlookers in the doorways and the corners. and if one of these onlookers came sufficiently close or looked sufficiently hungry, a chair was offered him, and he was invited to the feast. Gradually there was effected a separation between the spectators and the guests, a separation at least sufficiently complete for working purposes. There was no time during the festivities that ensued when there were not groups of onlookers in the doorways and the corners, and if any one of these onlookers came sufficiently close or looked sufficiently hungry, a chair was offered him, and he was invited to the feast. It was one of the laws of the Veseliha that no one goes hungry, and while a rule made in the forest of Lithuania is hard to apply in the Stockyards district of Chicago, with its 250,000 inhabitants, still they did their best, and the children who ran in from the street and even the dogs went out again happier. A charming informality was one of the characteristics of this celebration. The men wore their hats, or, if they wished, they took them off, and their coats with them. They ate when they were pleased, they moved as often as they pleased. There were to be speeches and singing, but no one had to listen who did not care to. If he wished, meantime, to speak or sing himself, he was perfectly free. The resulting medley of sound distracted no one, save possibly alone the babies, of which there were present a number equal to the total possessed by all the guests invited. There was no other place for the babies to be, and so part of the preparations for the evening consisted of a collection of cribs and carriages in one corner. In these the babies slept, 3 or 4 together, or wakened together, as the case may be. Those who were still older and could reach the tables marched about munching contentedly at meat bones and bologna sausages. The room is about 30 feet square, and whitewashed walls, bare save for a calendar, a picture of a racehorse, and a family tree in a gilded frame. To the right there is a door from the saloon, with a few loafers in the doorway, and in the corner, beyond it, a bar, with a presiding genius clad in soiled white, with waxed black mustaches and a carefully oiled curl plastered against one side of his forehead. In the opposite corner are 2 tables, filling a third of the room and laden with dishes and cold viands, which a few of the hungrier guests are already munching. At the head, where sits the bride, is a snow-white cake with an Eiffel Tower of constructed decoration, with sugar roses and 2 angels upon it, and a generous sprinkling of pink and green and yellow candies. Beyond opens a door into the kitchen, where there is a glimpse to be had of a range with much steam ascending from it, and many women, old and young, rushing hither and thither. In the corner to the left are the 3 musicians, upon a little platform, toiling heroically to make some impression upon the hubbub. Also the babies, similarly occupied, and an open window whence the populace imbibes the sights and sounds and odors. Suddenly, some of the steam begins to advance, and, peering through it, you discern Aunt Elizabeth, Ona's stepmother, Tita Elzbieta, as they called her, bearing aloft a great platter of stewed duck. Behind her is Kotrina, making her way cautiously, staggering beneath a similar burden, and half a minute later, there appears old grandmother Majutny, with a big yellow bowl of smoking potatoes, nearly as big as herself. So bit by bit, the feast takes form. There is a ham and a dish of sauerkraut, boiled rice, macaroni, bologna sausages, great piles of penny buns, bowls of milk, and foaming pitchers of beer. There is also not 6 feet from your back the bar where you may order all as you please and do not have to pay for it. In Polish, come faster, screams Maria Brzezinskas, and fails to work herself, for there is more upon the stove inside that will be spoiled if it be not eaten. So with laughter and shouts and endless badinage and merriment, the guests take their places. The young men, who for the most part have had huddled near the door, summon their resolution in advance, and the shrinking Jurgis is poked and scolded by the old folks until he consents to seat himself at the right hand of the bride. The 2 bridesmaids, whose insignia of office are paper wreaths, come next, and after them the rest of the guests, old and young, boys and girls. The spirit of the occasion takes hold of the stately bartender, who condescends to a plate of stewed duck. Even the fat policeman, whose duty it will be, later in the evening, to break up the fights, draws up a chair to the foot of the table. And the children shout and the babies yell, and everyone laughs and sings and chatters, while above all the deafening clamor, Cousin Maria shouts orders to the musicians. How shall one begin to describe them? All this time they have been there playing in a mad frenzy. All of this scene must be read or said or sung to music. It is the music which makes it what it is. It is the music which changes the place from the rear room of a saloon in the backyards to a fairy place, a wonderland, a little corner of the high mansions of the sky. The little person who leads this trio is an inspired man. His fiddle is out of tune, and there is no rosin on his bow, but still he is an inspired man. The hands of the muses have been laid upon him. He plays like one possessed by a demon, by a whole horde of demons. You can feel them in the air round about him, capering frenetically. With their invisible feet they set the pace, and the hair of their leader of the orchestra rises on end, and his eyeballs start from their sockets as he toils to keep up with them. Timozius Kuzelska is his name, and he has taught himself to play the violin by practicing all night, after working all day on the killing beds. He is in his shirt sleeves, with a vest figured with faded gold horseshoes, and a pink striped shirt suggestive of peppermint candy. A pair of military trousers, light blue with a yellow stripe, serve to give that suggestion of authority proper to the leader of a band. He is only about 5 feet high, but even so these trousers are about 8 inches short of the ground. You wonder where he can have gotten them, or rather, you would wonder, if the excitement of being in his presence left you time to think of such things. For he is an inspired man. Every inch of him is inspired. You might almost say inspired separately. He stamps with his feet. He tosses his head. He sways and swings to and fro. He has a wizened-up little face, irresistibly comical, and when he executes a turn or a flourish, his brows knit and his lips work and his eyelids wink. The very ends of his necktie bristle out, and every now and then he turns upon his companions, nodding, signaling, beckoning frantically, with every inch of him appealing, imploring on behalf of the muses in their call. For they are hardly worthy of Timozius, the other 2 members of the orchestra. The second violin is a Slovak, a tall, gaunt man with black-rimmed spectacles and the mute, impatient look of an overdriven mule. He responds to the whip but feebly, and then always falls back into his old rut. The third man is very fat, with a round, red, sentimental nose, and he plays with his eyes turned up to the sky and a look of infinite yearning. He is playing a bass part upon his cello, and so the excitement is nothing to him. No matter what happens in the treble, it is his task to saw out one long-drawn and lugubrious note after another, from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until nearly the same hour the next morning, for his third of the total income of $1 per hour. Before the feast has been 5 minutes underway, Timozius Kuzelka has risen in his excitement. A minute or 2 more, and you see that he is beginning to edge over toward the tables. His nostrils are dilated, and his breath comes fast. His demons are driving him. He nods and shakes his head at his companions, jerking at them with his violin until at last the long form of the second violinist also rises up. In the end, all 3 of them begin advancing, step by step, upon the banqueters. Valentisavisa, the cellist, bumping along with his instrument between notes. Finally, all 3 are gathered at the foot of the tables, and there Tamo mounts upon a stool. Now he is in his glory, dominating the scene. Some of the people are eating, some are laughing and talking, but you will make a great mistake if you think there is one of them who does not hear him. His notes are never true, and his fiddle buzzes on the low ones and squeaks and scratches on the high. But these things they heed no more than they heed the dirt and noise and squalor about them. It is out of this material that they have to build their lives. With it they have to utter their souls. And this is their utterance, merry and boisterous, or mournful and wailing, or passionate and rebellious. This music is their music. Music of home. It stretches out its arms to them. They have only to give themselves up. Chicago and its saloons and its slums fade away. There are green meadows and sunlit rivers, mighty forests and snow-clad hills. They behold home landscapes and childhood scenes returning. Old loves and friendships begin to waken. Old joys and griefs to laugh and weep. Some fall back and close their eyes. Some beat upon the table. Now and then one leaps up with a cry and calls for the song of that. Then the fire leaps brighter in Temzoshis's eyes, and he flings up his fiddle and shouts to his companions, and away they go in mad career. The company takes up their choruses, and men and women cry out like all possessed. Some leap to their feet and stamp upon the floor, lifting their glasses and pledging each other. Before long it occurs to someone to demand an old wedding song, which celebrates the beauty of the bride and the joys of love. In the excitement of this masterpiece, Temzoshes Kuzelka begins to edge in between the tables, making his way toward the head, where sits the bride. There is not a foot of space between the chairs of the guests, and Temzoshes is so short that he pokes them with his bow whenever he reaches over for the low notes. But still he presses it and insists relentlessly that his companions must follow. During their progress, needless to say, the sounds of the cello are pretty well extinguished, but at last the three are at the head, and Temzoshes takes his station at the right hand of the bride and begins to pour out his soul in melting strains. Little Ona is too excited to eat. Once in a while she tastes a little something when cousin Maria pinches her elbow and reminds her, but for the most part she sits gazing with the same fearful eyes of wonder. Tita Elzbieta is in a flutter, like a hummingbird. Her sisters, too, keep running up behind her, whispering breathless. But Ona seems scarcely to hear them. The music keeps calling, and the far-off look comes back. And she sits with her hands pressed together over her heart. Then the tears begin to come into her eyes, and as she is ashamed to wipe them away and ashamed to let them run down her cheeks, she turns and shakes her head a little, and then flushes red when she sees that Yorgis is watching her. When in the end Temzoshes Kuzelka has reached her side and is waving his magic wand above her, Ona's cheeks are scarlet, and she looks as if she would have to get up and run away. In this crisis, however, she is saved by Maria Brzezinskas, whom the muses suddenly visit. Maria is fond of a song of lovers parting. She wishes to hear, and as the musicians do not know it, she has risen and is proceeding to teach them. Maria is short but powerful in build. She works in a canning factory, and all day long she handles cans of beef that weigh 14 pounds. She has a broad Slavic face with prominent red cheeks. When she opens her mouth, it is tragical, but you cannot help thinking of a horse. She wears a blue flannel shirtwaist, which is now rolled up at the sleeves, disclosing her brawny arms. She has a carving fork in her hand, with which she pounds on the table to mark the time, as she roars her song in a voice of which it is enough to say that it leaves no portion of the room vacant. The three musicians follow her laboriously and note by note, but averaging one note behind, and thus they toil through stanza after stanza of a lovesick swain's lamentation. This is a Polish song, which translates to: Goodbye, my dearest flower, goodbye to my happiness too. As for me, the unfortunate, I see, the highest has decided that I am to live alone in this world, in misery.